Hello, everyone. Today we're going to explore the world of René Descartes, an emblematic figure in French philosophy. Descartes is a key figure in our intellectual heritage. His thought left an indelible mark on his era and had a profound influence on European intellectual development. To begin with, Descartes can be characterized as a veritable truth hunter. This description, though simplified, captures the essence of his philosophical quest. The obstinate search for truth is at the heart of his approach. Driven by a fear of error, Descartes never hesitated to question everything he thought he knew. For him, the very basis of philosophical thought was to doubt, to question our certainties, prejudices, and perceptions. But Descartes was not only a philosopher, he was also an accomplished scientist, mathematician, and physicist who refused to compartmentalize philosophy and science. This interdisciplinarity was more common before the 19th century, when the separation between philosophy and science became more marked. So when we look at Descartes, we can't ignore this fusion between philosophical reflection and scientific investigation, an invaluable heritage that sheds light on the way in which science and philosophy have become more closely linked. Drawing on his scientific method, Descartes decided to apply it to the realm of philosophical knowledge, and what he found was revealing. We are often encumbered by erroneous ideas. Descartes argues that these errors do not arise solely from our ignorance or foolishness. Rather, they are the result of a multitude of factors which, cumulatively, regularly lead us into error. In particular, he cites the influence of education and the teaching we receive. Descartes points out that our learning can sometimes be out of sync with reality. As you know, and as I have experienced, the knowledge transmitted at school evolves. Facts once taught as truths can be called into question or corrected, especially in constantly evolving fields such as history, but also in the sciences, where what was accepted a few decades ago may be outdated today. But Descartes doesn't limit himself to criticizing education. He also attacks what he calls opinion, those widely held ideas that often lack a solid foundation. He sees opinion as the lowest level of knowledge, a pseudo-knowledge that must be approached with great skepticism. For Descartes, it's essential not to accept information at face value without first subjecting it to critical scrutiny. But Descartes goes even further. Beyond education and opinion, he argues that our very human nature inclines us to error, predisposing us to misunderstanding. One example he uses to illustrate this point concerns our senses. Descartes shows that our senses, though fundamental to our experience, can often deceive us. Whether it's sight, smell, hearing, taste, or touch, there are instances where our perceptions are wrong, giving us a false understanding of reality. Optical illusions are classic examples where what we see is not an exact representation of reality. Similarly, auditory illusions can lead us to believe we are hearing sounds or words that are not actually present. These deceptive sensory experiences demonstrate that our perception can be biased, altered, reminding us that we must not blindly rely on our senses to access the truth. Descartes begins by recognizing the many obstacles to knowledge, a theme he develops with insistence. In fact, we recommend reading his Discourse on Method to fully grasp his approach, set out in a clear and accessible manner. In this work, Descartes shares his journey in an almost autobiographical way, tracing his childhood, his years of study, and accumulating evidence of the fragility of knowledge, which is often based on erroneous beliefs and prejudices. The essence of Descartes' approach is to highlight all the aspects that can compromise our access to knowledge. Our great difficulty, as human beings, lies in the fact that we interact with the world exclusively through our senses, which are not always reliable. It is therefore crucial to question the information we receive from our senses. To illustrate this mistrust of our sensory perceptions, Descartes uses the example of a stick immersed in water, which appears to break at the surface. Although the stick remains intact, this phenomenon misleads us as victims of an optical illusion. This kind of perceptual error leads Descartes to conclude that we should never rely entirely on our senses or preconceived opinions. Descartes thus adopts a radical skeptical approach, trusting neither our senses nor our opinions, as both can be sources of error. He insists on the idea that everything is potentially wrong unless it has been rigorously verified and proven. For him, all unproven knowledge must be considered potentially false. Thus, in the face of the inherent fragility of our knowledge, Descartes advocated suspending our adherence to any belief, opinion, or piece of knowledge, thus until such time as solid foundations could be laid to rebuild our understanding of the world. This approach is often referred to as the method of methodical, radical, or even hyperbolic doubt. The adjective hyperbolic reflects Descartes' intentional exaggeration that all our beliefs could be false. Descartes himself recognized that, until we can rebuild our knowledge on more solid foundations, we must necessarily operate with our existing beliefs. There's no question of completely detaching ourselves from the world or suspending all judgment. Descartes then evokes the idea of morality by provision, a kind of temporary moral code adopted until we can establish the rightness or wrongness of our beliefs. He began to doubt what he saw, heard, and thought he knew, even going so far as to doubt his own existence. According to him, if our senses can deceive us, then we cannot have absolute certainty about our bodily existence, since our knowledge of it comes exclusively from our sensory experiences, which are inherently dubious. Consequently, Descartes postulates that he cannot assert his existence with certainty, at least in a corporeal sense, as this assertion would be based on dubious sensory perceptions. This philosophy of doubt suggests that, given the possibility of error, however slight, the risk is real and should not be ignored. Descartes thus adopts a posture of extreme skepticism, where any unverified belief or opinion must be treated with caution. It could be said that Descartes embraced doubt as a means of achieving certainty, because by questioning everything, he ensured that he would not err or be fooled. It seems paradoxical that the philosopher who so highly valued the quest for truth should have used doubt as his principal tool for achieving it. Descartes saw doubt not as an end in itself, but rather as an instrument, an integral part of his method for eliminating error. Doubt thus becomes an essential tool for achieving truth. At the end of his reasoning, Descartes arrives at the idea that one thing remains indubitable. If everything can be called into question, the very capacity to doubt cannot. Doubt, according to Descartes, attests to its existence. It is not a material entity. It is a manifestation of thought, existing in an immaterial, abstract, and intangible form. So if I doubt, my doubt is real, affirming that doubt is a form of thought. And unlike a sensory illusion where we can perceive something that doesn't exist, a thought, even an illusory one, remains a thought. This underlines the idea that the act of thinking, even dreaming, is irrefutable proof of the existence of thought itself. What we experience may not reflect reality, but the dream, as such, is real in its essence as a dream, an illusion, a thought process. This is what Descartes brings to light, doubt, and therefore the thought that flows from it represents that which cannot be denied. For him, this constitutes a fundamental truth, an indisputable certainty. Whichever way you look at it, you inevitably end up with the reality of thought. Descartes identifies an undeniable truth. While our sensory perceptions can be called into question, thought is irrefutable. This leads to the conclusion that the existence of thought implies the existence of the thinker. Hence Descartes' famous assertion, "I think, therefore I am," indicating that the act of thinking confirms self-existence. However, there are some reservations to be had about this assertion. The use of I in I think is not universal and depends on linguistic and cultural context, highlighting a bias in the way individuality is conceptualized. This expression of personal thought is not universally self-evident, and can be questioned from a logical point of view, since thought itself is immaterial, without definite form or spatial limits, which complicates the attribution of an individual identity to the act of thinking. Directly associating thought with an individual, or confusing the two, is an approach that can be called into question. As Nietzsche pointed out, we don't have ideas in isolation. Rather, ideas come to us. When an idea emerges, it's the observation of a thought that runs through us. So the presence of thought is not necessarily proof of individual existence. For Descartes, the evidence of our existence rests on thought, suggesting that, beyond our individual thought, mind itself is the only indubitable reality, the only thing whose existence is certain. This illustrates a fascinating aspect of Descartes' philosophy. The first truth or foundation on which any edifice of knowledge rests is immaterial. This notion defies our everyday understanding of reality, which tends to focus on the material, the physical, and tangible objects. It's paradoxical that the first established truth, on which our entire quest for knowledge is built, should be immaterial. Yet this first truth, as Descartes describes it, serves as the pillar for all other truths. It concerns our existence as thinking individuals, affirming our reality as thinking beings. Here we come to a crucial aspect: Descartes' influence on future generations. Although some consider him to be a Christian thinker, Descartes was first and foremost a philosopher who attempted to demonstrate the existence of God, but did not make it the pivot of his philosophy. His starting point was not God, but doubt, followed by the concepts of thought, existence, and individuality. As a result, in a strictly Christian context, Descartes verged on heresy. Before him, philosophy had been essentially theocentric, with God at the heart of all thought. Descartes didn't advocate secularism in the 17th century, but he did break with tradition by initiating a philosophical reflection centered on the individual and not on God, which was significant at the time. Descartes, as a scientist, was also in favor of Copernican ideas. However, he refrained from publishing a work supporting these theses after learning of Galileo's problems with the heliocentric system, aware of the risks of censorship and the limitations this would impose on his freedom of thought. Descartes was therefore far from being a dogmatic or inquisitive philosopher. Rather, he was cautious in expressing his thoughts to avoid conflict with ecclesiastical and academic authorities. In my view, this notion merits closer examination, as it sheds light on a number of aspects. Descartes attributes a higher level of reality to thought than to matter, implying that physical objects possess a less concrete essence. This perspective is reminiscent of Plato's philosophy, which conceived of the material world as a replica of an ideal world, populated by archetypes or eternal ideas, difficult to define without recourse to analogies. Plato postulated that our universe, before manifesting itself physically, existed as a set of ideas or principles. For example, the law of gravity pre-existed the physical effects of gravity, serving as an archetype or founding principle for this force. In this sense, observable gravity would be a physical embodiment of the idea or essence of gravity. The link with Plato lies in the notion of a reality transcending the physical world, a sphere of immutable truths. For Descartes, this reality manifests itself in the form of thought, which he designates as a substance, albeit a non-material one. Thus, Descartes and Plato share the idea of a first, transcendent, and fundamental essence or substance, which defines the profound nature of reality, far beyond tangible materiality. For Descartes, spiritual or mental reality has as much validity as physical reality, suggesting that the conception of reality should not be limited to materiality. What exists, according to Descartes, is not necessarily tangible or material, reflecting Plato's dualism between the sensible and intelligible worlds, or between matter and spirit. Descartes illustrates this idea with the example of the piece of wax, used to demonstrate that physical objects are subject to change and corruption. To understand the essence of a physical object, we mustn't rely solely on its material characteristics. For example, a piece of wax may be hard, white, and crumbly at first, but as it is heated, it becomes liquid, darker, and more spread out. These transformations show that its sensible properties change, and therefore cannot define its true nature. Descartes concludes that the essence of an object lies not in its material attributes, but rather in its capacity to transform itself. Thus, defining a physical object goes beyond its observable characteristics. In the case of the lump of wax, it's not its color or shape that defines it, as these can change, but its inherent capacity to change, underlining that the nature of a physical being goes beyond its material aspects and is defined by its potential for transformation. In Descartes' philosophy, as in Plato's, the idea prevails that intelligible truths are eternal, transcendent, existing outside time and space. Truth, in this context, should conform to these eternal truths, these immutable ideals. Addressing the notion of eternal truth in a material universe is complex, given that the eternal aspect of our physical universe remains uncertain. It touches on profound metaphysical questions, exploring the non-physical origin of the material world. For Descartes and Plato, ideas represent eternal realities, a conception echoed in the prologue of the Gospel, according to John. In the beginning was the Word, logos in Greek, where logos symbolizes spirit, thought, intellect, the world of ideas. The statement, "in the beginning was the Word," could be interpreted as an allusion to the primacy of ideas, or the mind. It is therefore pertinent to note that for Descartes, the essence of the human being is defined by its immaterial dimension, its spiritual aspect, underlining the importance of the mind in understanding existence. The mind produces thought, an unmistakable entity for Descartes. Unlike the body and matter, which are constantly subject to change, it is impossible to doubt the eternal, what exists before and beyond matter. This suggests that our true essence lies in our eternal nature, transcending the materiality of our existence. Materiality may change, but the elements of spirit have a deeper capacity. They exist, but their existence is not limited to physical manifestation. Just as we don't need to go outside to prove our existence, the act of being doesn't require external manifestation. Being does not necessarily imply revealing one's existence to the outside world. Mind, in theory, could have been self-sufficient, existing eternally without the need for externalization. However, there seems to be a need or desire for the mind to create a reflection of itself, perhaps to contemplate itself. So we, as beings, could be the reflection of this spirit, its mirror, allowing the spirit to perceive and express itself beyond its immaterial existence. Thank you all.